I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week we're going to be looking at two categories in one video, talking about both the original and adapted screenplay categories, giving my predictions to ultimately help you with your own predictions, to hear my thoughts, hear my analysis and stats. Now we're on season 10 of Old's Oscar Countdown, so a great track record of accurate predictions, but ultimately here to help you with your own predictions, to talk through things, to give some reasonings, and to do a full breakdown, a deep dive of these individual categories. But now that we're further along in the season, if you don't know, each and every week what I've been doing is breaking it down a single Oscar category, giving my predictions as to who I think will get nominated. But with this episode, every single year that happens, it's kind of in many ways the demarcation point to the Oscar season really ramping up. Now I'm starting to do two categories in one video. Later on this week, on Thursday, I'm going to be doing another video just on the new Best Casting Award. So very excited about that. But it's a sign that you guys should subscribe to the channel, because not only are we going to have videos on Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, but also now multiple videos a week sometimes when it makes sense. For example, this upcoming one for casting. It just indicates to me that, okay, now that we're starting to merge categories together, we're trying to double things up. It's really the heat and at the heart of Oscar season. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Let me know your predictions. Let me know what you think of my predictions, and we can kind of go back and forth and build a great community, so that maybe if someone thinks one thing, someone thinks something else, we can kind of establish that kind of great back and forth too. And if you want to hear my thoughts on individual movies, you can also feel free to use the timestamps in the description below to jump ahead on my thoughts on an individual movie or an individual category. But without further ado, let's jump into things. We're going to start off with the Best Original Screenplay category with my 5 predictions. The first one being Sinners. And this is more of a prediction, less so of what's going to win, and a more ranking of the likelihood of getting nominated, as in a lot of my other videos. So Sinners, I think, has a real strong likelihood of getting nominated for the simple fact that I'm very confident that it's going to get nominated for Best Picture. And we know over the past 10 years, an average of 80% of the Best Picture nominees also get nominated in one of these two screenplay categories. And if you think about it, it makes sense. For a lot of people, the driver of liking a movie is the story, is the emotion. And I think a lot of people associate that with the screenplay and what was actually written on the page. So we do often see a correlation between these two categories, original and adapted screenplay and Best Picture. And that's a stat I'll be repeating throughout the video, so I do want you to kind of completely understand that many of my picks have to do with the fact that I have it in my Best Picture predictions, therefore I also have it in for screenplay here. And I encourage you to do the same. Go through your own predictions, your top 10 of Best Picture, and see, do I have 80%, or at the very least, 7 out of the 10 getting Best Screenplay nominations? If I don't, that would be an outlier statistical rarity. So just keep in mind when you're making your screenplay predictions, but also your Best Picture predictions, is things lining up that way? Because over the past 10 years, consistently, 80% of the Best Picture nominees also are nominated for one of these two screenplay prizes. But the movie Sinners itself is not just a movie that's going to get nominated for Best Picture. It's also a really creative movie, an original movie, and we've seen Best Screenplay winners in the original side of things often get rewarded for their kind of original premises and how unique they are. Think of movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once or Get Out. I don't know if Sinners is in that class just yet. I think there's an appreciation of what Ryan Coogler did for the originality of this world. That being said, it still is more of a kind of action blockbuster that doesn't have a bunch of wordy dialogue sequences all the time. So I think it's going to be more of a vote for originality than it is for, great dialogue. That being said, you have a likely Best Picture nominee, an original movie. And I think, like I mentioned on last week's episode with Ryan Coogler, wanting to be appreciated for essentially taking a chance and making an original movie, big blockbuster, and finding success. People who want to support those types of movies will want to kind of show their support through nominations as well. I think Sinners can kind of be that way to show that support and love for original cinema. Then my second prediction, I went with Sentimental Value. This is a movie that's gotten a little bit more tepid response by the general public in its limited release, which didn't totally surprise me, but maybe did help me or unfortunately kind of move it down a bit on my Best Picture rankings overall. That being said, even if the movie disappoints, let's say, and doesn't get in for Joachim Trier for director, or let's say doesn't get all 4 acting nominations like I'm predicting right now, it's still going to get nominated here. This is a movie that is a writing first movie, a writing and acting movie, more than it is like, a below the line technical marvel. It's about kind of the great script and the way these people interact and the families interact. I've mentioned this before, but I do think that this movie in particular will resonate with the Academy more so than any other group. So even if it disappoints a bit with the critics or the general public or some of the other award shows, I'm still going to hold strong up until the Oscars, just because I've seen the movie and I know the content of the movie, and we've been doing this for 10 years. This is just a movie that I think will thematically resonate with so many Oscar voters. Not only the kind of English parts, but also the international parts. We know there's a good split between the Academy there, in the same way that's also ultimately about families and families of filmmakers and actors, and it has that kind of resonance, the added resonance for many Academy members who themselves are filmmakers and actors. And I think even if it underperforms, it gets in for screenplay in particular, not only because it's a screenplay-focused movie, but Joachim Trier is seen, I think, as a writer first. He had a nomination for Worst Person in the World in this category just a few years ago, and that was a surprise nomination on Oscar morning. Not a lot of people were predicting that. So now you have the same kind of writers here, Joachim Trier and Eskil Vogt, his co-writer on the film, who's also a great filmmaker in his own right, writing, once again, another kind of contending movie and a critically acclaimed movie. So I do think that even if it disappoints, he's going to be seen as a writer first, if anything, because he's been regarded as a writer before and well appreciated as a writer before. So Sentimental Value should, I think, comfortably get a nomination. Then my third pick, I went with It Was Just an Accident, the latest film from Jafar Panahi. And this may be my frontrunner to win. If you were to kind of put a gun to my head, what's winning this category right now, I think I may go with It Was Just an Accident. That being said, I have it in my number 3 spot here, just because I'm slightly concerned that my belief in the movie as an Oscar contender won't be justified. Now, we've talked about it on the Best Picture episode or the Best Director episode, how the stats actually back up. It was just an accident to get nominated. Being a Palme d'Or winner really helps that fact. But as someone who's seen the movie, I do think ultimately it will resonate. And that's why I am kind of betting on it and putting it in my director predictions and picture predictions. And if it gets in for picture and director, it definitely is going to get in for screenplay, because it is a very talky movie. It's all about, if you don't know, the movie is about a man who stumbles across the person who he thinks was his torturer for many years as a prisoner of war. And he kidnaps him and essentially debates and tries to understand what he's going to do with him, and if revenge is the correct action, and even if he's 100% sure that that is the man, because he never actually saw his face, because he was tortured as a prisoner. So all the kind of complex feelings and moral debates about ethics and justice, that's what the movie's about. And it's people having these long kind of monologues in different locations about this topic. And it's a great movie. It's a very interesting movie. It's also just a movie about thinking and writing and talking. So I think because of that, has a great chance to get the win for Best Original Screenplay, particularly if it's a real contender of a Best Picture nominee and a Best Director nominee as well, and gets, a lot of critical support, which it has been so far, and I do think ultimately it will. Like I said, there's that thing in the back of my mind, Jafar Panahi, he's not this super well celebrated director. Will they really want to reward him? I do think it's going to be maybe more of like a Drive My Car type of a path, or maybe even something like an Anatomy of a Fall type of a path, minus some of the acting support. But another thing I haven't mentioned yet, and why I think that will even help It Was Just an Accident, even if it's not the most beloved movie of the year, which is that it's in another language. Now you may say, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I actually think it's a good thing. Because if you go back for the past few years, all the way back until 2017, that was 8 years ago, that was the last time, 2017, that was the last time that we had all 5 of the nominees in this category be solely English-speaking movies. Almost every single year, whether it be Anatomy of a Fall or Minari, or even, last year with a movie like Anora, which is mostly in English, but there's large parts in Russian or Armenian as well. So there's many movies every single year that we see that are not just in English. And I think part of it has to do with the expanding Academy becoming more international, and the writers branch also kind of mimicking those tastes. That being said, I think it's also notable for me on a very simplistic point of view, which is if you're an American voter and you're watching It Was Just an Accident, and you have to quite literally read the words on the screen, you become more conscious of the words themselves, of how things are written, of the floweriness of the language, that sometimes you're not in a non-subtitled movie because it's literally just not in front of you and you have to kind of confront that and read it. It's almost like doing another extra part of your brain that makes you, I think, a little bit more conscious of the words of the film itself. So it was just an accident. The fact that it's not in English, I think, is actually a benefit, not only because we've seen that every single year, at least one of these kind of non-English language films get in for Best Original Screenplay, but also because we see that added aspect of the words literally being on screen, I do think creates a subconscious effect of a stronger connection between, oh, the words of this are really good, versus watching a movie like Sinners, where it has great writing, but you're maybe not as aware of it because it's focused on, you know, the action and the visuals, and the words literally aren't on the screen, in case, unlike a movie like It Was Just an Accident. Then my fourth prediction, I went with Marty Supreme, and this is less of a prediction because I think the script is going to be so amazing from this movie, and more so a connection that I think this is a likely Best Picture nominee, and we know that Best Picture nominees oftentimes also get nominated for screenplay. We talked about that earlier. 80%, 8 out of the 10 nominees will get nominated for screenplay. At least statistically, that's what's probably going to happen this year. And I was looking at some of the other contenders, and the other contenders I don't think really have a great shot at getting nominated for Best Picture, or maybe they get nominated for Best Picture. Now, I'm always, hesitant to say a prediction like this because I haven't seen the film myself. That being said, it's more of a calculation of, based on people who have seen the movie, they're pretty confident that it will get in for Best Picture. And if it is going to get in for Best Picture, it's very likely more so to get nominated in one of these categories. So it's kind of that collaboration there. Still a bit concerned that, Josh Safdie, and his work with Benny Safdie as the Safdie brothers, they haven't really been Oscar filmmakers, so will this now just become a huge Oscar player? Maybe it will. Like I said, I haven't seen the movie. But another factor that I think is important to this episode that we haven't talked about that will also benefit Marty Supreme is that this is a writer-director movie. And I looked over the past 10 years, and there was an average of 4.1 out of the 5 nominees in this category that was a writer-director, which is, I think, a real strong testament to the fact that the writer's branch, A, doesn't care if the writer of the movie is also the director of the movie. As a matter of fact, they prefer it. 4.1 out of the 5, almost every year. Almost all the nominees come from writer-directors. That is to say that the person who's nominated for writing also directed the movie. Now, some cases it's like Ryan Coogler, where he's the sole credited writer and then also the sole credited director, or it's the case of Josh Safdie here, who is co-writing it with Ronald Bronstein, but then Josh Safdie is the sole credited director. As long as the director of the movie also was nominated for writing in this category, there's a strong appreciation there from the writer's branch. So you also have that here with Marty Supreme. Just gives it another boost that some of the other possible contenders don't have. Then my fifth prediction, I went with Jay Kelly. And this was a movie I just recently saw, had a really great time with, so I'm not sure if that's totally coloring my opinion. That being said, I'm still, and have been, kind of negative on his chances of getting nominated for Best Picture. I don't have it in for Picture, I don't have Clooney, I don't have Sandler. You can check out my videos for that. That being said, I do think that this is still a movie that is in the 11-12 spot. It definitely could get nominated for Best Picture, and its path is through Screenplay, because I do think this is the best chance at a nomination. First off, it's written and directed by Noah Baumbach, who also wrote the movie with Emily Mortimer. But Noah Baumbach, I think, is seen more so as a writer than a director, who's known for his scripts and his great dialogue, going all the way back to something like Kicking and Screaming. He's more of a Woody Allen than he is a David Lean. And you've seen that with the nominations in the past. He was nominated for, never been nominated for director, but for writing was nominated for Barbie, was nominated for The Squid and the Whale, was nominated for Marriage Story. So he is seen as a kind of, I think, a well-respected and well-liked writer. And Jay Kelly is another one of those kind of writerly forward movies where it's all about sentimentality and reflection and looking back. And it's also a movie that I think will resonate with Academy members in particular, because it's about an actor looking back on his career and the kind of difficulties and perils of being a movie star, which I think the general public may brush up against and be like, boo-hoo, poor you. But I think the Academy will definitely understand that the genuine sacrifices of the industry and of trying to achieve your dreams. There is, I think, a real strong content-specific element that will appeal particularly to Academy member voters because they've gone through a similar experience. It's essentially about them. So it is still a strong Best Picture contender. I think stronger than some of the other possible contenders. So it could get in for picture. It has potentials for acting nominations. I think the movie itself, as a content, is going to really resonate with Academy member voters. Noah Baumbach is a 3-time nominated writer, so even if it doesn't get in for Best Picture, it can definitely get in for a nomination. So it's just all these extra little small bits where I'm not super bullish on Jay Kelly as a Best Picture contender. That being said, I still think he can get in for screenplay. It is the type of a movie that maybe gets in for screenplay and won another prize, and that's kind of it. And then some possible contenders for Best Original Screenplay before we get to the Adapted Screenplay category. The first one being Blue Moon. This is another great movie and another very writerly movie. It's set really in just one location. It plays more like a play than it does a movie, with long sequences and long monologues by Ethan Hawke. It's a writerly movie about a writer, so it's definitely going to appeal, I think, to the writers because of that. The big question ultimately is, will this movie be seen? We've been talking about how 80% of the Best Picture nominees also got nominated for Best Screenplay, which in a way you can look at as, okay, if I'm going to get nominated for Best Picture, I need a screenplay nomination. But it also kind of brings about another point, which is maybe it's because the Best Picture movies are so well liked that they get in for screenplay, and that oftentimes we don't see just sole screenplay nominations because those movies ultimately don't get seen. And I think that's my concern with Blue Moon, and even my other possible contender is, will it get seen? Is this a real strong contender? Now, the positive side is, this is from Sony Pictures Classics, who's really great at getting actors nominated, particularly for some of their small movies. And oftentimes that has a cascading effect to some of these screenplay categories. So if Ethan Hawke is a potential nominee for Best Actor, that could help the script, in this case for Blue Moon, in the same way we saw recently with a movie like Living, where Bill Nighy gets nominated, and then also the screenplay gets nominated too, in a bit of a weaker category. That's kind of a path there. Ultimately, I left it out though because I think it's a smaller distributor. I think not enough people will ultimately see the movie, and even in the sense of Richard Linklater directs the movie, but he didn't write this movie, so people may not. He doesn't have that extra added factor, though this being the writer-director, it is another kind of sole credited writer. That being said, it just needs to be seen, because if it's seen, I do think this is a type of a movie that's so writer-focused and so written that it can definitely get nominated. And then my other possible contender, I went with The Secret Agent for similar reasons. I think Wagner Moura will get nominated for Best Actor, and if he does get nominated for Best Actor, more people will see the movie, and if enough people see the movie, maybe it also gets in for Screenplay, and then also maybe gets in for something like Best Picture. That's a path that is definitely there for it. We saw that path with something like I'm Still Here last year, get nominated for Best Picture as well. So there could be that similar Brazilian contingent about a very similar topic as well that we've discussed that also gets nominated. But right now I'm more of a wait and see approach, because this movie is long. This movie isn't super writerly. It's more about, I see the movie, glances and looks than it is about this great flowery language. And some people may find it a little bit slow and the runtime a little bit long because it's a little bit more of a movie that takes its time, but therefore not want to reward the screenplay. So it's not a super showy screenplay, I think, in that point of view. That being said, if the movie's super well liked and, like I said, gets in for picture and potentially actor, then screenplay may kind of follow along. Okay, the Best Adapted Screenplay category. I definitely recommend you check out the first part of the video for Original Screenplay, because we're going to be talking about a lot of the same sort of stats and things that apply with Original Screenplay, or more just general writing rules when it comes to the Oscars that will apply to the Best Adapted Screenplay. So this one may be a little bit quicker just because we've talked about a lot of these stats already. But still, regardless, my first prediction for Adapted Screenplay is going to go for One Battle After Another. Great characters, unique kind of adaptation of the Thomas Pynchon novel, which keeps kind of his spirit, but also has the PTA signature kind of oddity and horniness in certain elements as well, and strangeness. But this is a movie that I think is going to get potentially PTA's first Oscar. He may eventually get Best Director later on in the night, but if screenplay happens before and is rewarded in the actual show before Best Director, it may be the first time Paul Thomas Anderson wins an Oscar, which will be a fun moment there. And also, just very simply, it's the Best Picture frontrunner to win right now. If it doesn't, if it has a chance of winning, it most definitely is going to get nominated for screenplay as well. And we just know that because the last Best Picture winner that didn't get nominated for screenplay was 1997's Titanic. Every single Best Picture winner, at the very least, was nominated for Best Screenplay, even a silent movie like The Artist. So if One Battle After Another didn't get nominated for Best Screenplay, it's not winning Best Picture, but because it's the frontrunner to win for Best Picture, it's almost guaranteed to get nominated for original or adapted screenplay, excuse me. Then my second prediction, I went with Hamnet for very similar reasons to One Battle After Another. Less of a showy script, but if it's a serious Best Picture contender like I think it is, and potentially the Best Picture frontrunner, it has to get at least a nomination here. I also think its adaptation is integral to the movie, and I think will be a benefit to it getting nominated, because this is an adaptation from the author of the book herself, in the case of Maggie O'Farrell, who is co-writing the movie with Chloe Zhao. So there's going to be no controversy as to how this movie was adapted, because you have the literal author of the book adapting the movie. This is how she would adapt her own work. So there's not going to be any kind of issues with there. If anything, it adds a sense of authenticity to the film, that there's the director didn't decide to do their own thing. They worked and collaborated with the original novelist to create something that's a little bit more fitting for the film. It's not a super writerly focused movie where the great speeches and things like that. You would think so because of Shakespeare. A lot of the movie is just Shakespeare being talked about. That being said, it's still, like I said, a Best Picture frontrunner. It is about a writer in Shakespeare, so it has some of that flowery language as well, and that kind of period-accurate language, but also has that very unique adaptation factor from the fact that it's still the novelist adapting their own work, working with the filmmaker. Then my third prediction, I went with Wake Up Dead Man, and this is a pretty simple calculus in terms of my prediction, which is to say that the first Knives Out movie got nominated for Best Screenplay. Glass Onion, the second Knives Out movie, got nominated for Best Screenplay. I think this one is going to get nominated as well. Got great reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, raves out of TIFF. Not in the sense of it may be potentially contending for Best Picture, but just another solid movie within the Knives Out trilogy that we've got here so far. It's always a risky pick to pick a movie that I think will only get one nomination, and it being in this category. That being said, we do have historical precedent. That's what happened with Knives Out 1 or Glass Onion. They only had one nomination for those movies. It was the script. And why was it the script? Because this is a murder mystery with a bunch of twists and turns and great writing and great kind of, story trying to be unfolded and excitingness within actually the story itself. And I think, another writer-director here with Rian Johnson. It's always a risk, but I think there's just so much precedent, whether it be the content of the movie itself, the great reviews, it being another Knives Out movie, the other Knives Out movies having this exact same path. In a way, I'm very confident in this getting a nomination, because people will just automatically kind of slot in the Knives Out movie. And I do think this will be still another kind of well-appreciated one. Maybe people like it not as much as Glass Onion or not as much as the first, or there's always going to be some odd rankings, but for the most part, great reviews out of TIFF, so I expect this one to do quite well. And then my fourth prediction, I went with Wicked for Good. And this was a movie I was a little bit surprised to see a lot of people not predict. On Gold Derby and some of these sites, it's in the 7th or 8th spot. And I kind of get that on one hand. The reason to not nominate it is pretty simple. The first one, last year, didn't get nominated for Best Screenplay, and musicals often don't. That being said, I think the fact that the analysis that I did, which is 80% of the past 10 years, 80% of Best Picture nominees also get nominated for a screenplay, is a really strong statistic. And when I was looking at this category, I think sometimes year over year nuances are really important. So for example, why did Wicked not get nominated last year? That's the big question. Why am I predicting it this year when I didn't get nominated last year? And hey, that's a fair question. But there's a lot of context to the categories each and every year. For example, last year, the adapted screenplay category was very competitive. 4 out of the 5 nominees were nominated for Best Picture in adapted screenplay last year. And the 5th movie, Sing Sing, in my opinion, was probably in the 11th or 12th slot. That was a real strong contender that had an acting nomination, that had a bunch of precursor support as well. So it was almost like Wicked lost out to 5 other Best Picture nominees. It was only ended up being 4, but it was kind of 5 strong ones at the very least. So it would make sense why a movie like Wicked, which is a musical, musicals often don't do well with screenplay nominations, it would make sense why in a competitive year it doesn't get nominated. But this is a different year. This is not as much of a competitive year. Because if you take a look at your predictions and you don't include Wicked, I think there's a very likely scenario where you're essentially saying Wicked's not going to get nominated and it's going to get beat out by 3 other non-Best Picture nominees. That's a little bit more of a different statement than Wicked last year missing out on 4, arguably 5 Best Picture nominees versus this year where you're saying Wicked can't beat out 3 non-Best Picture nominees. That's the kind of calculus and where I'm coming from here. I think it's less of a competitive category. So then you have the fact of Wicked just being, I think, a potential top 5 Best Picture contender. I think we'll kind of get the support of a screenplay nomination and ride that wave as well and beat out just generally less liked movies. And I'm not saying Wicked has this amazing screenplay or is a super writerly focused movie, but, movies like Dune or 1917 or Top Gun Maverick, these were all movies that weren't obvious screenplay movies. They were action blockbusters in the same way, Wicked is a musical blockbuster. Those still got nominated for screenplay because they were well-liked movies that got nominated for Best Picture. That's ultimately my calculus and where I'm coming from it this year. I think last year was a uniquely competitive year for Best Adapted Screenplay. This year is less so. And, if you're saying I have, Wake Up Dead Man and Bugonia and Train Dreams or No Other Choice, or what do you end up being? All those movies don't have a guarantee, and all those movies end up actually may not get nominated for Best Picture. So you're really, I think, people who aren't predicting this in many ways are making more of a bold statement than people who are. I think it'll be a little bit more clear once it gets nominated, I think, at Critics' Choice, and then maybe, gets a BAFTA nomination, and a little bit more clear as to Wicked being, a real strong contender, and push come to shove, are you really predicting a non-Best Picture nominee in, let's say, something like Train Dreams over this movie when we know this movie is so strong? And we know that 80% of Best Picture nominees each and every year get nominated for Best Screenplay. I think that's too bold of a statement to make, and therefore I'm predicting Wicked. Then with my final pick, I went with No Other Choice. And this was a pick that I ultimately made because I think of the possible contenders, it has the strongest likelihood of getting nominated for Best Picture. And I went back to that 80% stat and I figured, okay, this has the best chance of getting nominated for Best Picture, therefore it should be in my spot. Now, aside from that fact, even if it doesn't get nominated for Best Picture, I still think it's probably the stronger of these contenders because it's got a bunch of other things going for it. So, of course, the Best Picture factor, that was important to me as well. Another factor, this is a unique adaptation. If you don't know, this is a South Korean movie, but it was based on a Donald Westlake book from the 90s. Who was a American English crime fiction writer. So it's kind of an odd choice to take a book that was set written in English and then turn it into a South Korean movie, and not a recent movie or a book that was like critically acclaimed or prestigious. It was that kind of crime fiction, not pulp, but pulp adjacent, I think, kind of a novel into a South Korean movie. It's a very interesting adaptation in that sense, but I also think it means it's a little bit more accessible to an American audience. Just its story, I think, will be more resonant in that sense. It's also a movie that is funny and sharp with its social commentary, and we oftentimes see funny or clever movies get nominated for screenplay awards. So a movie like The Lobster, with its unique originality and cleverness, will get nominated over a movie like Loving, which is a strong, Oscar contender from that year, which had a couple of acting nominations, and was a nice, sweet movie, but wasn't maybe a movie that was as creative as The Lobster. I think of a movie like No Other Choice being similar to then something like Train Dreams, where Train Dreams is an emotional, very sweet movie, more like a movie like Loving, but it doesn't have the kind of cleverness or the sharp wit of something like No Other Choice, which is just a preference amongst the people within the screenplay category. They like some of those metaphorical allusions and that kind of commentary, more so than just, a very earnest and emotional movie. That's just a little bit more of the preferences that we see within the screenplay category. You have all those factors, and then you also add on top of it the fact that Park Chan-wook is a writer-director, which we know they appreciated. Add on top of the fact from that, it's a movie that's not in English, so you have the words written on the screen. So all the stats and the criteria that I've established added on to the fact that I think this is also just personally a stronger Best Picture contender than the other two nominees, gives it all the kind of chances of getting a nomination. I know a lot of people aren't really a big believers in No Other Choice. I've seen the movie. I do think once it gets released and seen by more people, it will be a little bit more appreciated. I think it ultimately will get some support from the critics at the end of the year. And if that's the case, screenplay can be, even if it doesn't get nominated for Best Picture, screenplay can be a real possibility. Okay, now speaking about some of those possible contenders I've been teasing, the first one I went with Bugonia, which is a movie I've soured on in terms of its Best Picture chances after seeing the film. It is a lot smaller and less ambitious than some of other of Yorgos Lanthimos' movies. Its ending is very bold and singular, although adapted from a South Korean movie with the same ending, but I think still will stick with a lot of people that haven't seen the original film. And does have some sharp commentary and metaphorical kind of allusions between kind of conspiracy thinking today, and it's a real kind of tackle on, I think, where we are as a culture. That being said, it's not written by Yorgos Lanthimos, written by Will Tracy, who has had some success on the TV side, but less so on the film side. So it doesn't have that writer-director benefit. This is Focus Feature's second movie, so it's not going to be as prioritized as a movie like Hamnet. So I think that, if Bugonia and No Other Choice don't get nominated for Best Picture, I think that No Other Choice has a stronger chance of getting nominated for Screenplay. But if Bugonia is a stronger Best Picture contender, then definitely Bugonia as a script here definitely has that chance of getting nominated as well, because of some of those kind of very sharp, astute kind of political, social, societal commentaries that the movie is trying to portray. Then the final possible contender that I had is Train Dreams, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. But yeah, it is a movie that's more so about feeling and emotion and visuals and score and lighting than it is sometimes with the writing. Now, a movie like Sing Sing could have been categorized as that as well. And Greg Kuidar and Clint Bentley, who were the writers of this movie, also wrote Sing Sing, which did get nominated last year. That being said, Sing Sing was a bit of a stronger contender, I think, as a potential nominee for Best Film, Best Picture. It was also kind of A24's second priority, and early on in the season was their main priority, so they put a little bit more effort and resources towards that. Whereas something like Train Dreams, I think, is actually Netflix's third or fourth most important movie, behind movies like Jay Kelly, K-Pop Demon Hunters, or Frankenstein. So I'm not sure it's going to get that kind of support of campaigning to get nominated there. And even though I like the movie, I understand why a lot of people want to put it in for picture or director, because the movie's really great. My question will be ultimately, will enough people see it, and will enough people, in particular with the screenplay, think about the screenplay so much so? It gets more nominated in the screenplay category, in my opinion, if it's a real Best Picture contender and gets in there. But it's not a writer-focused, dialogue-focused kind of a movie to get nominated solely on screenplay alone. But that's about it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your predictions for both original and adapted screenplay. And stay tuned to later this week, Thursday, where I'm going to be breaking down the new Best Casting Award, talk about what I think is going to happen, my predictions for that category, and do a deep dive. Just one video on that new category should be a lot of fun, so stay tuned for that. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.